Hi everyone, I'm Mia Casillas, and I'm going to be discussing ancient Egyptian women displaying agency through stelae. Before I start, I want to say thank you to anyone that takes the time to listen and watch this. This has been a huge project for me and one that I am passionate about. Let's begin. Throughout ancient Egyptian art, females have been shown in a supportive role, depicted either with and or holding their male counterparts or giving back to others. However, there are instances where females fight this role and show their agency. A shift from the submissive to the dominant role can be seen through stelae made during the Middle to New Kingdom periods, circa 2055 to 1085 BC. This will be shown by taking a look at stelae and how women's representations on these artifacts act as a record of women moving away from their husband's shadow and gendered roles. Acting as a threshold between the living and the dead, false doors were placed on tombs to act as both the ritualistic focus and a way for the deity or the spirit of the deceased to enter and leave the tomb. Whereas most false doors take on the appearance of a door, or a door with the deceased sitting at an offering table, Stelae of four women is in the shape of a false door from the 13th dynasty, that not only deviates from the traditional imagery on false doors, but also goes against the understood hierarchy of gender and power. In this stelae, we see a false door split into two main sections. The top section devoted to text identifying the individual woman shown, and the bottom section showing four women with three extending offerings to the fourth on the right side. Normally, a male would take the dominant position and the main individual to receive the offerings given to the spirit of the deceased on such a stelae. Putting men in these dominant positions shows them as the ones with more power, since it signifies their importance and it shows that gender is the main factor in determining who can hold these positions and therefore removes women from gaining access to these positions. However, with stelae of four women, we have no man to take that primary role, and thus visual and proper representational power is given to the women shown in the stelae. With this stela, other examples of gender hierarchy and compositional importance are dismissed, and in their place we see stelae that gives women their agency and removes them from the subordinate role towards men. Women within ancient Egypt appear to have been forced into a limited social and financial space, based on images and texts that survive. Women seem to primarily bear children, or at least be deemed to have domestic needs throughout life. Because of this tame lifestyle, women are assumed as family support and only used for household reasons. This can be interpreted in a few ways, but the overall argument for a supporter is encompassed by the fact that women were meant to be mothers, stay home, and be wives or mistresses if chosen. Gay Robbins mentions in their writing that a common title for ancient Egyptian women was mistress of the house. While this title, to modern views, can be thought of more positively, and with a larger degree of authority, since it denotes a sense of ownership, that could not be said for ancient Egypt. Women would essentially stay home and not be able to gain any social, political, or financial power. Besides being a mother and housewife, the other visual identification for women was through them being subordinate to men, whereas this can be connected to being a wife and supporting the husband, which is highly visible within ancient Egyptian depictions of married couples, where the wife is shown wrapping her arm around the male and supporting him. Women were also shown and used as a supporter of the gods and goddesses that were worshipped, as well as being servants to others of higher authority. Stelae are the best resource to look for gender roles and ideals, since these were not mass-made, expensive pharaonic artifacts that were used as symbols for ideal life and characteristics. Instead, stelae show a broader view of how women represented their agency. These were used as vehicles to show power and authority, since women appear as the owners of funerary stelae and more often as the owners of votive stelae. We need to think of the placement and the general audience for these artifacts, whereas the other objects that remained from this period were made for royals. Stelae were commissioned by both elite and non-elite, meaning that the imagery did not need to fit within a set elite worldview. With votive stelae, in particular, being placed in homes, the audiences of these images would be the family, thus reinforcing the idea that the woman is the head of the house and the one in charge. These artifacts were limited to a small audience, but that does not negate the value that they have in showing women in a dominant position and asserting themselves as more than subordinate to males. There was more stelae made than any other artifact within ancient Egypt, although the exact number created is not known. Even though funerary stelae appear to be more important, since they relate to helping the individual into the afterlife, votive stelae were the more common stelae found, and the significant majority of them found belong to women. Gay Robin states that the number of votive stelae owned solely by women is far greater than the number of funerary stelae. I do believe that votive stelae were in such high demand before funerary stelae, since they were a way for women to have an object that was solely theirs and based on them alone. They become the sole image and the main focus. Therefore, votive stelae display women gaining more agency and more social and financial power, and a way for them to move away from their household duties and family-supporting roles. They show themselves as strong women capable of devoting themselves and their prayers to a certain god or goddess. Votive stelae first appear in the Old Kingdom and continue throughout the Middle Kingdom. From Middle to the New Kingdom, a shift towards making funerary stelae happens and continues throughout the end of the Old Kingdom. Jeanette Lee explains that exactly when the transition from votive stelae to funerary stelae of the independent depiction of women took place remains unclear, but its large-scale adoption may be part of the innovations of culture made during the Third Intermediate Period. By the Libyan dynasties, dynasties 22 to 24, or circa 945 to 725 BC, this practice has become customary and so ambiguous that scholars have suggested it resulted from an increased power of women under Libyan rule. As the author mentions, this hypothesis and the reason behind the shift is unknown. During the Third Intermediate Period, many new gods and goddesses were added and an overall shift in style was adorned. Therefore, a shift from wanting to only use funerary stelae in lieu of needing to add more votive stelae could be a determining factor, but the thought that women gaining more power and thus being given more access to show their agency is clear. Typically, the male is put in the dominant position by facing right on the left side of the stelae, while the women are usually placed as a subordinate behind the male, holding and supporting him. Gender hierarchy is used to suggest that the male is the owner or more valuable individual on the stelae, since males are usually commonly seen as the more important gender. Women that display a refusal of the roles by using them to benefit themselves or deviating from these roles aid in exhibiting a sense of power and agency. This use of power in gender hierarchy can be seen in funerary stelae follower of the king Meji and his wife Hanet, where the man is shown visibly larger than the female and placed in front of her. The female in this image also places her hand on the mill to show support for her husband. This stele puts not only the viewer's attention towards the male, but also suggests through the image that the most important individual in the couple is the male. The arrangement of the pair gives little opportunity for the woman to present herself as anything other than a supporter and a lesser counterpart to the male. There is no indication of her authority or her place within the world, whether that be in or outside of the house. There is no description or title given to her in the text, nor does the text even mention her name. Although this imagery is one that is commonly used and almost forced upon us through repeated use, that does not mean that there is imagery of women disregarding these positions and using stelae to make a statement. Stelae of Nejer-Mose is an example of not conforming to the roles of traditional imagery. In this case, the woman is shown much larger than her male counterpart, even though she is placed behind him. Although the woman is still shown supporting the male, the size difference causes one to question the true owner of the stele and ponder as to why the woman would be larger, despite her placement behind the male. Could her large size imply that she was the owner of the stele? Or does her large size have to do with her dismissing the roles against compositional hierarchy, and possibly wanting to remove herself and breaking away from the norm and gaining her sense of agency and power away from her husband? Since she is larger than her husband, we can speculate that she didn't want to get overshadowed by him, and that she wanted to ensure that her identity would continue to be known far after her passing. These small examples of contrasting roles of compositional hierarchy can be a starting point in women showing and gaining agency. There are quite a few examples where a female is shown taking either the dominant role or at least taking a more dominant position than her male counterpart. Hatshepsut did this well before her reign and then pushed it even further during her reign as pharaoh, and can be seen in Stelae of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. On this stele, Hatshepsut is shown wearing the blue crown in front of her stepson/nephew Thutmose III, giving offerings to the god Amun-Ra. Typically on votive stele, the male would be the one to make the offerings to the gods. Switching this common gendered role and putting a female in the giving role places her as a visual person in power. Even though she was a female pharaoh, that does not mean that she was given social and political power right away. Instead, Hatshepsut had to earn her power because her gender caused a limited response to her ruling. This stele suggests that she was not only powerful enough to make an offering to a god, but overtake her male counterpart's position on the stele. Through imagery and the text from ancient Egypt, it is clear to see that we do not have a large example of women in roles or positions of power. However, through stele, we can see that women were homeowners and were able to commission objects of their own. Being a homeowner and having the financial means to make purchases for one's own purpose are demonstrated in stele of 4 women and stele of the lady of the house, Anre and Neb. Although there is a wide period between these 2 stele, the demonstration of women moving away from their accustomed settings that can be viewed from both is clear. Both show that women can be in charge and have ownership of a house or object, ensuring that their memory and overall existence lives on, as well as showing that they do not need a male counterpart to justify their existence or their ability to provide for themselves. Stelae of 4 women contradicts the thought that women needed to be shown with their husbands, or have their husbands/children provide their monuments. In this example, there is no husband and no known family relationship between women. Although there are some examples of stelae donated by daughters to commemorate their mothers, this stele does not appear to be an example of this, because through translation, we can confirm that the 2 younger women are not related to the 2 older women. Stelae of the house, Anre and Neb, almost goes against the derogatory title of Lady of the House. This stele implies that Anre and Neb was the owner of the house, as well as the owner of her stele. The stele also shows her funerary practices of her entering the afterlife, as well as going through or starting her gender transformation into the afterlife. Lady of the house to our modern vocabulary sounds powerful. However, the same cannot be said for ancient Egypt. Knowing that the audience of these artifacts was limited to a small few, and generally comprised only of the family members of the individual on the stele, we can call stele where the women are seen solo and placed in a position of authority a demonstration of power, since they know that family would be the only ones to view them. These women are clearly stating their power through stele and asserting this view of her onto the family members as a sign of her power. Although no more than a handful of individuals would view this imagery, the family that did understood the woman's position. They saw her as more than a mother or family supporter. Instead, she used stele to display her in charge of the household and the people within it, as well as her own imagery. Another example of women demonstrating their dominance and disregarding traditional imagery can be seen in the stele made of Akhenaten and Nefertiti during the 18th dynasty. In this depiction, the roles are reversed. Nefertiti is placed in front of Akhenaten, however his knees still cover a part of her, and he is the one to extend and wrap his arm around her as a sign of support. In this image, we can see that Nefertiti is not placed in the secondary position that women are normally in, and shown wearing the double crown that usually only the pharaoh would wear. In this depiction of a woman and male, the woman does not take on the supporting role, but rather it appears as if she is the one to give the orders and to assume the main position and social power. This depiction can be used to further the idea that many during the time of their reign, thought of Nefertiti as their king instead of Akhenaten. Women moving from the subordinate position to the main position on stelae can be caused from women gaining independence. This visible representation of liberation of women can be seen from as early as the 12th dynasty. Women were already exercising their authority, and it only gathered more speed as time continued. This exercising of liberation can also be a result of women wanting to demonstrate rights with their independence, by presenting them as homeowners and financially well off. Women could have also wanted to choose their burial placement. Women shifting context and conveying their agency and ability of decision-making are expressed by Barbara S. Lesko, explaining that 19th century archaeologist Augustine Moret found 23 late-period stelae of women bearing the religious title chantress. Of the 23 stelae, only 5 included a husband's figure and name, whereas 18 belonged to women alone. This group of stelae suggests that women could exercise preference when it came to their funerary monuments, and may not always have been buried with their husbands. This collection of 23 stelae alone suggests that women were not tied down by their role and by their husbands, and could decide a fate for themselves. We have a set of stelae that also gives proper reason to believe that women had more power than what is commonly understood. Instead of believing that women would follow their husbands and support them in their decision, this group of stelae lets us know that women did push away from the norm and were not attached to a male throughout their lives. Even though we understand a vast amount of how women were thought to serve through text and images, and we believe that women were viewed as solely subordinate within ancient Egypt, should not limit our examination of the remnants of ancient Egypt, and does not mean that taking an extra look can offer bonus or ignored information. While on surface level stelae show offerings and prayers to gods, as well as offerings to the deceased, stelae can also show how women gained agency. Through stelae, we can see a shift from women being shown in a submissive secondary role, where they are not given proper credit concerning their social and financial power, or subjected to being tied to their husbands or another male figure, as well as an image that limits women's independence and personal identity, to a more dominant role, where women are shown on their own, shown as homeowners, and making their own decisions to where their bodies will lay eternally. In these stelae, the women are not taking on nor showing themselves in pre-constructed gender roles or ideas. Instead, we have women shown in positions of power, creating their own identity, and not being held down by their male counterparts. Looking closely at stelae, especially those made during the Middle to New Kingdom period, we can see women creating and gaining agency. Again, I want to say thank you for listening, and a huge thank you to everyone within the art department. I would not be where I am without you.